Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second day, our second Lunch and Learn celebration of conjunction with the City of Asheville. We're the Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Asheville and Buncombe County, as we collaborated with the City of Asheville to present a week of events in celebration of Juneteenth. Today seemed to be an interesting day. A lot of people said they had some interest in this, and this was a topic that Dr. Simmons was really enthused about. And we're looking at, we're discussing first families of Asheville, first African-American families, traditional families. As I say, wherever you're from, there are family names that you know in your area. Oh, those are the Joneses. The Joneses, you know, they're all over the place. They've been here for years. Well, that's the same thing for African-American families, be it in Asheville, be it in Buncombe County, be it in Western North Carolina. There are families that have been here and continue to be here. And so we wanted to talk about that history, that place in this community, but also talk about how you can go about finding out more information about your family, more information about your history. And that ties into Juneteenth because of what it was really about. So I'm Jonathan McCoy. I'm the Vice President of the Martin Luther King Jr. Association, and I'm also Professor of History at Mars Hill University, so I'm always the one kind of to give a little context of why we thought this is important. So how does this tie into Juneteenth? Well, the first thing is that, again, Juneteenth is a celebration of what General Gordon Granger makes this announcement when him and his troops arrive in Galveston, Texas on June 19th of 1865, saying that the people are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights, the rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection that heretofore existing between them become that between employer and hired labor. The free are advised to remain in their present homes and work for wages. They're informed that they will not be allowed to collect a military post, and they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. That's important because the proclamation basically told them you're free, but stay where you're at. Amen. They didn't listen. They didn't listen. Right after Juneteenth was a phenomenon known as the scatter. Scatter was the fleeing from Texas of these former enslaved people. Now, in a broader picture, at the end of the Civil War, there was a broad scatter of enslaved people, not just from Texas, but from all places where they had been held enslaved. And this happened because what started to happen after the Civil War that started to show up in newspapers were advertisements. These advertisements were known as basically, have you seen me? Have you seen this? Where are they at? They were advertisements that were placed by people looking for their families that they had been separated from during enslavement, that had been sold away. My brother Tom was sold to an owner in Virginia. I'm here in North Carolina. When Tom left, he was wearing a red shirt. Have you seen him? My son, my daughter, was sold away to a plantation in Texas. I'm in South Carolina. Have you seen them? Over and over, there were more and more advertisements during the scatter of people trying to connect. Family ties that had been broken, trying to reestablish that bond. Now also, as Reconstruction takes hold, there were new advertisements also that were going on. Have you seen them? Because what happened right after Juneteenth was a lot of the former enslavers did not freely let those free people go. They kept them working, they impressed them, forced labor, kidnapped not for ransom of money, but for ransom of work. And so there started to be advertisements searching for people who had been taken into work groups. My family history, my family comes out of Eastern North Carolina, Elizabethtown. My great-grandfather, his name was Captain Mingo McCoy. Captain Mingo went from Elizabethtown, which was outside of Wilmington, working pine trees, doing the tar, ended up in Ocala, Florida. And it was believed that he was impressed because he was the only one from that McCoy family that got down to Florida and started having to work down there. As we finally returned after years, my dad showed that we went to a family reunion. My dad at that time, I was in high school, so my dad was in his late 50s, late 50s. And an elder had him come in. She rubbed on his face and said, "Yes, you're from the one that was taken away." She couldn't see, but she rubbed and said, "You're from the one." And then as they talked, said, "Oh yes, your grandfather was Mingo." But that tie of how we went from Florida, that Mingo side from Florida up to Pennsylvania and down. So what we want to talk about is what are the ties that bind, but also the search to find those ties, to rebind them. And so we have Sasha Mister with us today, and she's going to really talk about her research, but also talk about how you can go about doing your research and also some of the interesting stories that you come across as you do things like that. And we find the ties that bind. So enough from me, on to Sasha.
Hi, everybody. I love family history. I am obsessed with it. I do it all the time. So a lot of the things that I do at this point come to be like a second nature. My mind works very much in the flow of how do I get the next piece of information that I want when I'm doing this. But I'm going to talk to you about just a journey that I took and exactly how we used various kinds of tools to really make amazing discoveries. So the title is First African American Families of Asheville and Buncombe County. I can tell you Dwayne Barton has roots going back 250 years in this county. People from the Lytle, Bergen, Foster, and West family also have 200 years of roots right in this county. Many families do. But this talk is hidden in plain sight, how shared family trees, and I'm talking about online family trees, and I use most often the site called Ancestry.com. It's free to put a tree on there. It's not free to look for the records, but some records are free. Okay, so shared family trees, social history, which is really knowing the history of the place you're searching. Where did people go to church? Where are the black cemeteries? Who were the big slave owners in that place? All this extra information about the times and place where your ancestor lived, beyond just your own family's data. Using vital records and using DNA have helped reconnect the descendants of once enslaved McDaniels, McDonnell, and McDonald families. All those names are the same. And then Hempel and Morris families. So I'll take you on a little journey. The clues along the way, as I said, were the shared family trees, which I just described, the social history. The vital records includes birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, cohabitation records. It's the records of the birth, death, and marriage. Mind you, a birth certificate, as an example, is a record of the birth when it happened. Everything about the baby, perhaps their name, depending on what their name is at the time later, but sometimes even the date isn't for sure. The mom's name you can generally trust. The dad's name, maybe not. If it names where those parents are born, maybe not. Maybe if it's a death certificate, maybe I'm telling you about the information about my mother's family, or maybe I'm so grief-stricken that I actually tell you my own mother. I'm supposed to tell you my mother's name, but I just write my own mother's name. I see it all the time. Okay, estate records, and that's the kind of record that you're going to find your ancestor's name in if they were enslaved, because the census didn't list people by name. So the kind of end of slavery times records are going to be estate records and newspaper accounts and other court documents, and then DNA. And when you take those clues and find new information, you add it to your tree, and then you repeat. You've shared the history, and you're going to look, now I know a few more names, maybe I know some more locations. I'm going to check the records again. Maybe I know there's a new estate record I need to look into. Do any of my DNA matches now show me a new name that I didn't know about, who's a descendant that I needed to know about? And then add that information and repeat. So, I got this letter. I have a tree called Asheville Family History, where I have been documenting the history of African American people from Asheville and Buncombe County and Western North Carolina more broadly. My own ancestors have lived in this area, and I've just worked with a lot of people. I used to keep a lot of separate trees, and I still do for some families, but a lot of the stuff just winds up, it's better here because rather than me having to chase it on different places because the same people keep overlapping. So I get this letter. It's in my ancestry messages. Hi, hello, I'm researching, and I'm not gonna read you the whole thing, but I actually made a little slideshow. I thought I was getting a slideshow, but, so if you want me to share the slideshow with you later, I will, but anyway, so he writes this letter. I'm researching an ancestor of mine who migrated to the gold fields in Bendigo, Victoria, Australia. In 1858, he was married, and on his marriage certificate, it says he is 28 years old and that he was born in North Carolina, USA. It lists his parents as Andrew Hempel, his name is Hampfield, a farmer, and Louisa McDonald, both of North Carolina. This would make Andrew, having been born about 1830. I cannot locate any USA records that can validate Andrew's birth or even his formal existence, nor his voyage to Australia. Andrew was of African descent, which was established through DNA testing. I was like, okay, now we're talking. Okay, I'm wondering if he could have been the son of Lucy McDaniel, who was a slave of Andrew Hempel of Old Fort, North Carolina. I know that Lucy was the mother of Sarah Gudger. You heard that name? But can't find many other records of other children. Andrew named his firstborn daughter Lucy/Lucinda. It's just a hunch I have that he was her son. Would you have any information? So by me putting a tree online with Sarah Gudger's family, which I was like, I want to find a descendant. I know she didn't have kids, but I want to find a niece, nephew, somebody. It said she lived with relatives, researched all those relatives. I was all over it. So anyway, I have her in my tree. And I have her mother, Lucy McDaniel, and this guy found it, and now he's asking me this question. And I was like, huh. Now, I already know in my family history brain, I don't know why it didn't occur to me before when I was researching Sarah Gudger, but when you have an enslaved family, it could be because it was like Sarah Gudger and McDaniel were the names. But anyway, now here he comes with, it's Hempel and McDonald. And I went, and the first thing I do with an enslaved couple, if they name two people, is have any white families just been married where one has that last name and the other one has the other last name, because that's how many enslaved families got put together. The pattern, this is part of doing this for a long time, is understanding that men often inherit money and land, and women inherit slaves. This happens when they turn an adult or when they get married, for both. It's like a certain age. But they also put a little clause in there that's like, and if the girl does not have any issue, my own child doesn't have any kids from her own body lawfully born, then the money goes back to the estate because they don't want to give their money away to say she marries some guy who already has kids, then his kids get it. You know, she doesn't, they want to keep it in the family. So I look for McDonald and Hempel. And Andrew Hempel is a well-known slave owner. We knew he enslaved Sarah Gudger. What's his wife's name? Catherine McDonald. I was like, oh, right there in front of me. And then, because Ancestry is getting better at indexing, the name Andrew Hempel comes up as a name included in the estate of a guy named William McDonnell. I was like, oh, this is 1838. So that by sharing the family tree, I make a connection. And by the next part was social history, right? So by the fact that I can zoom in on a white slave owner and get to know the neighborhood, who did he marry, who are his people, I know a little something that's going to help me in my search. The thing I linked here is his Find a Grave. Then we go to vital records. So I've got this marriage certificate that's naming this guy's parents. The death records, like that Find a Grave was so helpful to me. It tells me when Andrew died, it tells me his wife's name. But Find a Grave is not a primary source of information. And lately, people just put whatever they want on there. They're researching their family history. Maybe they got some things wrong, but they put it all in Find a Grave, and then someone else sees it and they go, oh, goody, and they fill in their whole family tree, and then you've got a bunch of mistakes that you're like, they're gumming up the works. The other note I have about vital records is, for everyone that you're researching, I'm looking for my grandfather, my great-grandmother, whatever, look for all of their siblings. When you go to the house in the census record, if somebody else is in the house and they're listed as a family member and you don't know who they are, like it's an aunt, it's a cousin, maybe it's a second cousin, maybe it's their great aunt. It doesn't say that, but you got to figure out who that person is, because maybe that's going to tell you, okay, now I know his mother's maiden name. Now I know the names of a sibling, because I could not find this dad before, but now I know his sister's name is Dolores, and boop, there it is. So you use all those clues. Census records, that's where you're going to first find your formerly enslaved family in 1870. If they were free, you'll find them in 1860 maybe, but you have to know what to look for, and names do change. So about those, I say they can be some of the most rewarding but confounding sources of information, because honestly, the names sometimes change for some folks because now they're going by their middle name. Some jerks go, oh, haha, I'm not going to follow the rules for the census. I'm just going to put initials down. That's not helpful for anybody. So you're like, sometimes you can figure it out, but it's very not helpful. So, so remember to check every sibling. If a cousin is in the house, figure out who their parents are. Look near the homes of the family members of the enslaver in 1870 census. Look at his sister's, 1870 census record if she's still alive. Because if she received enslaved people in a will or got married and got some people in her bequests, and maybe they were young enough to maybe not know where their relatives were, they could still be living there in 1870, kind of separated from the rest of the family. So if you check there and you go, you know what? Look, her name's Lucinda, and all those kids named their kid Lucinda. I think that must be the sister, So you use this information. Note that a stepson could be labeled as a son, a stepson, a son-in-law, or a boarder in the house. It could be same person, but they might call them different things. When you have trouble looking for your people, take out all the last name information and only search for the first names with everything else you know. You might find them living under a different name because somebody made a mistake and they have the name of the people above them in the next house because of transcription error. Or they actually, for the 1 year, the mom remarried and they're using the stepdad's name now. Like things you didn't know, but when you took out all the first names, all the last names, you're able to find it. And if you can't find your own ancestor, look for the sister or the brother, right? And if you really can't find your people in a census and you know they gotta be here, you go to a next door neighbor's house in the census where you find them. Look for somebody I look for somebody who owns a house, who's older, who's been alive in the previous census, and, isn't somebody like a lady who just got married, so I'm not gonna know what her name was before, and look for them in the previous census, and then go up the street, because maybe they just butchered the last name, and you can read it, and you go, oh, see, that says Givens, but they messed it up, and they think it says Flibbins, I would never have found it, so that's a trick to help find your people. Okay, then I get to estate records. So I found the last will and testament of William McDonald, and he's laying it out. These estate records can list multi-generations of families. They could list, I've seen people that had like 40 slaves in one county, 40 enslaved people in one county, and like 50 enslaved people in another, but they'll break them down by family. Or not, and that's really annoying. Like, you're like, what, why? Sometimes I had the rude discovery of, like, they were listed in families, but they were broken up in weird groups, and I realized that they were splitting up the girls of a certain age among the households in the will, and that was really, disgusting to learn. So then the next slide I show is the White McDonald family. So I just read this will, and here is the research I've done on the White family, and I see now the people that he's named in the will, these nieces and nephews. And what was really helpful is a lot of these McDonald white people did not know that they were also McDaniels or McDonald's or McDonald's. So they were kind of scattered, but because I was looking for something different, I was able to put their family back together too. The estate record include the list of enslaved people hired out. You could see this scribble-scrabble writing. You have to read stuff like this, but I'm good at it now. And then for the several years until the will is ready to split up, maybe they're waiting for the kids to be old enough, they hire out the enslaved people, and they usually list them in a family group. So I'm seeing, Lucy Enchild, I think that's Sarah Gudger's mother, Mary, who looks like to be Mary, Wesley, and Andrew, her children, and Andrew is the boy who went to Australia. Jesse and Susan, a couple, and their children, Anne and Mitchell, who turned out to be James Mitchell, and then grown adults, Levi McDaniel, Hardy McDaniel, and then Caroline and Peggy, all grown. So that's them. I'm like, okay, now I have families here. Now I go. So my letter writer, it's DNA tested. And here is who he matches. White Pattons and Mackeys, who were Andrew Hempel, the white slave owners' grandparents. Okay, so that means one of Andrew Hempel or his siblings is the father of one of his ancestor at some point. Okay, that also includes many white McDonalds and McDonalds, which means it's likely that one of Andrew Hempel's children, because he married a McDonald, whatever, one of their children is the father. Now there's a list of children. Some of them are too young. They're like a little section, okay? Now we've narrowed that down. DNA points us to these certain people. Watch the clock, okay. Doing all right? Okay. He's also DNA related to descendants of Susan and Jesse Morris, that couple who was named. They got taken to Georgia. And DNA descendants are I followed them back. What you do with DNA relatives is you see this list of matches, and if they don't have a tree, you make a tree. And I have all my tricks, right? So I'm really good at stalking people. I use my powers for good. They think they don't have a tree. They think they have a private tree, whatever. They may have a private tree, but I can see that they're cousins with this other person, and they don't have a private tree. And their username tells me that this, whatever. They said they lived in Brentwood, Tennessee, I'm all over them. So Jesse and Susie Morris also he's related to descendants of Hardy McDaniel and Levi McDaniel, who stayed here in Buncombe County. Levi, I think, left a will to his children when he passed. I'm trying to get in touch with some of those descendants. They're still here. I can't, they don't have, I try to find them. I'm trying to put on Facebook. I've messaged them, hi, I'm a family historian. I've got family history to share with you. That they wouldn't know this without this. And then I have a picture of what the DNA through lines looks like. So this one I have is showing Thomas Hempel, Andrew Hempel's father. This is my DNA, the guy who wrote me the letter. This is his people. You can't see it, but whatever. It's in the middle. And then these are other children of Thomas Hempel, Andrew Hempel, the white guy. Here and here and here, and it shows the descendants. I stopped 2 generations above the bottom line to protect the privacy of the people, just so you know. Everyone showing here is long deceased. So I can share this with you comfortably. Okay, so then I said, repeat as necessary. You get this new information. You found a new DNA match. You have built a tree, and you see, oh, wow. Now, I knew it was Morris's. They lived in Turner, Georgia. This person lives in Turner, Georgia. Look at that. I found it. Their great-grandmother's name was Morris. She's one of the kids. There you go. And then you add that one in. So then you've built up a family, and then you've got a new last name. Oh, one of the daughters married, in this case, a Butts. Butt or Butts is the last name. And I always laugh, because I'm like 5. So I'm like, oh, Butts. So you add that to your tree. You reach out to the people. You never make assumptions if they don't write you back. You don't say, oh, they're not writing back to me because I'm black. Or, I don't know what, they might be old, and I'm nothing against older folks. They don't know their password. Their grandkids set this up for them. They've never logged in. They don't know. They are nervous. They're like, oh, I don't know who that person is. I'm not going to write back. That sounds, you never know. Just keep writing to them nicely until they say, leave me alone. And then keep trying other people. When you found new history, share it with your relatives, because then you could say, oh, well, you know what I found out? We have cousins, and one of them married a Butts. They go, oh, yeah, Uncle Butts, I forgot about him. And then all of a sudden, they open up because they remembered something new because you helped them remember it. And I say, make sure to print out your discoveries. Print out your discoveries. Print out your photographs and share them with your elders who may not have computer access, because they love it. They might not be talkative, but when you show up with a tree and say, look what I found, then they're like, whoa, that's pretty cool. And then sometimes you get them to talk. I love computers, and they're great, but how many of you have pictures that you took 15 years ago? Did you print them? If you have them, it's because you printed them. If 10 years ago, 7 years ago, we take so many that we forget the pictures that we have are the things you can hold in your hand. You gotta get some stuff printed out, because yeah, paper does degrade, but digital stuff is, put it online, but print something, because you can't always bust out the computer at Thanksgiving dinner and say, hey, you know what, kids, let's talk about our history. And then you have this thing in your hand. you can email it to somebody. So don't just do it online, then download it, print it, and share it, and repeat. All right, so, and I still have some time, and I'm gonna let you ask questions. I say finding our ancestors in the story. So here's this dude, right? How did he get to Australia? I figured it out. Only by luck. I mean, I think a lot of it was luck, because I was like, what the heck? I put in Asheville, Australia, Buncombe, Australia, gold, I think gold, something like that, in Google. And boop, here comes, it's on top of Chun's Cove Mountain. It used to be called White Rock or something, built by this guy named John Evans. He was born in Buncombe County, I think, but he went to Australia to mine gold, and then he came back, and he wound up dying, I think, in Buncombe County. I think that's how Andrew got there. And then we also have, so Sarah Gudger, in her slave narrative, I'm not going to try to read it in the vernacular, but she says, I had 2 brothers, they went to California, never seed them no more, nor my sister, neither. I can't remember a lot about it. Okay, so she had brothers who went to California. Benjamin Hempel, a son of white Andrew Hempel, took 4 enslaved men with him to California to mine gold. Maybe one of those was Andrew. He got a story about himself in the 1903 newspaper. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was right around 1900. Describing his trip and what he did. He went to Havana Harbor. They crossed the Isthmus of Panama, and then they started working their way up, you know. That's the trip that 4 enslaved men also took. I said to my letter writer, you may very well be reading about the journey your own ancestor took to get to California, because I did find John Evans' emigration, his ship manifest going from San Francisco to Australia. Not with a guy named Andrew Hempel, but I'm like, dang it, I think that's him. I really think it's him. That's out there, and it's connecting. So this is my last one. African American families have lived in Buncombe County for over 200 years, and many of those who live here today can trace their ancestors back to those who were living here then. If you think your people were, ask me. The records of enslaved people prior to 1865 are most often found in estate papers, but are also found in court documents and newspaper accounts as well. Finding family behind the brick wall of slavery, I saw it called the brick wall, requires using as many tools as possible to piece together their histories. New technology brings us new methods of finding and connecting our roots. Computer access to digitized records, and DNA matching, and the infrastructure to link people to family records. But it still all starts with talking to your elders and writing down and printing your history. And that's all I wanted to tell you about.
Give you a chance. I'm gonna give Sasha a chance to wet her whistle real quick, because she was talking long, and for you to think of your questions if you have any. Couple things as a historian. One, yes, going to the courthouse and reading those documents, but again, a lot of times as you read, it's like, remember reading Shakespeare in school, is like that. So you have to start training your mind for the way that it looks, the script and things like that. Also, give yourself space to think about the names. My name is McCoy, M-C-C-O-Y. I have McCoy's M-C-K-O-Y. In the same house, it mattered on who was taking the census, if you were M-C-K or M-C-C. They decided, those people, they didn't have a decision, that person they can decide. So the M-C-Ks are also understand, again, where you might come from, talking to your elders. What are some of the family histories and stories that go beyond? My mom's people came out of Abbeville. My father's mother's people came out of Abbeville. One reason we talk about doing the research is always talked about in the family. You need to find out who everybody is because you want to make sure you weren't marrying a cousin. McCoys weren't supposed to marry Davis. Don't marry well because and there's always been this thing that we could see, well, wait a minute, my mom's people came out of Abbeville, my dad's people came out of Abbeville, and so that's always been a joke. But also the thing was, my mom's maiden name was Seibert, which is a Jewish name. And that was always a thing when she was growing up and see, we started talking about names, and growing up in Germantown, Pennsylvania, well, Philadelphia went to Germantown High, and that was the thing with Seibert. It was Jewish community, and they were trying to figure out why this black girl had this Jewish name. But the whole story was her family got ran out of Abbeville because of an uncle that was accused of having some kind of relationship, and so they ran out before he could be lynched. But that was, those stories that go on. So what are some stories, and what are people willing to talk about and not willing to talk about? But also it comes to this, as we talk about that Seibert and everything else, there is that intertwining. I have Portuguese, white, African, Jewish, Cherokee, Lumbee, blood in me. You don't get that just by sitting next to somebody. So as you do this research, understand that you're going to turn over some stuff, and you might all of a sudden find who is a cousin. It might be a distant cousin, but still a cousin of shared blood, shared ties. And so that's why it's so important as we have this discussion, talking about first families of Asheville. Yes, black people have been here for decades. That means white community is intertwined in the black community. So if we're so worried about pushing one down and lifting the other, pushing down your relatives, or are we going to lift each other up as family? And so those are some of the things that we look at and we want to really explore, but also to find out about yourself, to get a sense of who you are as a full picture. So now everybody's had a chance to think, okay, I had this question, you got a chance? Sasha's, you ready to go? So we'll open up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the microphone so they'll be able to catch it on the video.
Oh, I talk.
Everybody's going to hear.
And first of all, thank you for telling us. You've done wonderful work. Thank you. DNA matches. So how do you find DNA matches in Ancestry? I'm in Ancestry, but how do I go about that?
I should have specified. Okay. Ancestry.com has their website that has the infrastructure for you to build a family tree, right? Yeah. That part's free. Even though they try to get you to sign up and pay, you do not have to pay to set that up. It's called a guest account. You can Google it. How do I set up a free guest account on Ancestry? Okay. When you have a login to Ancestry, you can also pay to subscribe to the service of accessing records. You can access just records in the US, you can access records in they call it the whole world, it's a little, not quite. The world records, and then you can even pay more if you want to have newspapers, or you could just get the newspapers on the side or whatever. Then separately, you can get DNA tests, and darn it, if we hadn't just, on Father's Day, they were $39.99. That they always run specials. They'll run another one probably Labor Day. Who knows? They run them all the time. So I always tell if somebody says they want one, I go, just wait, they're gonna go on sale. $49.99, that's with shipping. Don't go in blindly. I would go to First of all, I love DNA testing. I manage about 100 profiles on Ancestry. I meet strangers all the time. I just found some friend's birth parents for her because that's something I do as a hobby from DNA. I think it serves me and the families that I've worked with more than I fear what troubles can come with the DNA. It is illegal for a company to discriminate discriminate against you for health reasons for medical insurance based on your DNA. It is not illegal for them to discriminate against you about selling life insurance if they were to get your DNA information somehow. And they do find ways. Now, you sign electronically when you do these DNA tests that say, this is what I'm signing up for, to test my DNA, and that's it. You can't share it, and blah, 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 blah. I trust that. I'm aware that the company can be bought by another company. Have at it. I am learning what I want to know from this DNA. So, that's all I'm saying. If you want, that is a separate thing. When you do that, take the test, you have to register it with the site. And then you have a DNA profile. That's like part of your thing. You can link that to a tree. It'd say, this is me. This is my test. And say you have other family members, like I got my grandmother, I got my sister, I got my mom, I got my cousins, people who shared it with me, whom I met, who are now know our cousins. And because I know something about our history, I know now that people who match me and them have these people in common. And I'm very pinpointed. And because of that, I've been able to identify like 6 different slave owner ancestors in my family, exactly who they are, because the DNA just points right at them. And the other ones I'm circling like a vulture. And I'm finding new cousins and people who are like, hey, you know, the outside child. There's always like gonna be people, I'm adopted, I didn't know. And oh my gosh, Uncle Joe had another child that we didn't know about. You know, don't go in thinking that you cannot be shocked by what you find. But it's getting to the point where you don't have to take the test yourself. Enough people around you might have taken the test that something can be found.
Well, see, that's what I'm interested in. If I don't want to take the test, how would I find, I know some people in my family have taken the test.
There you go. So you'd say to them, can you make me a collaborator on your DNA results?
Okay.
They can do that. And they are not sharing their DNA information, they're just sharing their match information. That's what's great about Ancestry. Yes?
Hey, Sasha.
Hi, how's that going?
Okay, so my family, we did our DNA. And so my third great grandfather and my third great grandmother migrated to Salt Lake City. And they had some kids. And my grandfather's family was in Salt Lake City. But when we did it, we had all these white people from Salt Lake City. They won't accept our request, but I know who they are. I'm gonna get their names printed on a shirt and go to Salt Lake. But the issue that we're having is that my grandfather was reportedly an only child. So we found a young lady who is like very closely related to my mom and her siblings. But she was adopted. We have no idea who her parents are. And so apparently my grandfather's father had another child. Here's the issue. We have no idea who he is. We just know his name is Frank Makowski, and he was Lithuanian, and like he was out there just popping out babies like Pop-Tarts. So how do we help her? Like we're trying and there is like nothing's coming up.
Okay. The quick answer on DNA is there's a tool called the LEADS method. It's what adoptees started to use to figure out how they were related to their DNA matches. This is how it works. You start with your third cousins, somebody that you match about 100 centimorgans with. That's Okay, right? I think there's 3,000, so 30-something hundred altogether centimorgans, and you and your mom have 1,800 or something like that. And then like figure it goes half for every generation, right? And then there's certain numbers for like, when you say someone's a cousin once removed, right? Well, if my parents are siblings, this is my cousin. If they have a kid, they're once removed from me by a generation. If that person has kids, they're twice removed from me by a generation. And there's a certain percentage that'll come out. Now, you don't get 50-50 from each parent. It's like 49.9, whatever. You know, it's a little bit off. And there's dominant and there's recessive genes, right? So you know that in a family of 5 kids, they could all look completely different. Same parents, but each one got a little different mix from the great-grandparents and the grandparents, and you know, that comes down, right? One looks really much like his mom's people, and the other one looks like his dad's people, right? So you can understand that. So you do the Leeds method, where you start with, I went on this total tangent. So you start with that third cousin. You click on them, and you go to shared matches. So you say, show me that person and all the people who match them, and you color them in. That's group 1. If you know who they are, then call it group Jones-Smith, right? You know, oh, I know them, they're my Jones and Smith cousins. Okay, boom, you label it. Go back to the list. Refresh your page, because sometimes it doesn't update all the colors. Then go back to your list, and you find the next person in the list, starting with the third cousins, who doesn't have a color yet, right? Click on them, go shared matches. Click on that person and all their shared matches, another color. That's group 2. If you know who they are, label the group. Go back, do it again. If you are lucky, and there's no stepkids, half-brothers, and things like that, you would wind up with 4 groups of people that represent your 4 grandparents. You start with third cousins because that's the way it breaks down. You can go even further than that, where you could go, okay, well, I see in this group, this half is all related, and this half is, then that's actually their parents getting split off, right? But it gets harder when you get into a small community, because then those lines start to crisscross. The folks knew each other. They're a little distant cousins. And if you're from a community where there's a lot of cousins, not saying it's funny business, but it gets really hard for the DNA. Especially that's why in Jewish DNA testers, there's a whole bunch of issues around that. Not that it can't be, you know, figured out to some extent, but it's very tricky. You know, any little population that kind of intermingles. So do your Leeds test,
Hey,
get your answers from there, and tell her to do that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you spell the name of that method that was first used for adoptive kids?
Repeat it. The Leeds method, L-E-E-D-S.
Like the city in England. Okay,
Yep,
thanks.
like the city in England. It's named after some lady. Just Leeds method DNA sorting. You will find it.
We have time for one more. Yes, one more.
I wanted to ask you if you would please mention something about secrets that are kept. And when you ask about oral history, you can't really obtain it. And the reason why I ask this is that I joined Ancestry about 15 years ago, and Sasha, you helped me with that. And I did the DNA and joined Ancestry, and it was like the only matches that were coming up for me as cousins, they were white. I really didn't see that many African Americans on Ancestry. But when I started telling friends about all of the amazing things I found, because I am adopted, and it was if they were saying, well, why do you want to do that? Why are you doing all this research? It was as if I was doing devil's work,
Mercy.
And I wasn't supposed to do all of this digging. But now I'm beginning to see more African Americans on there, and I am able to communicate with them. So can you say something about keeping secrets, and when you ask about somebody in your family, your grandparents would tell you, hush child, and don't you go out here telling nobody that.
All right. Well, I have two things. There was, I can't remember all the details, but somebody had done a project where they reached out to World War II veterans to ask them about their experiences in war. And they didn't get the results they had hoped. People just weren't able to speak about it. It was too traumatic. But I think 30 years passed, and when those men were much older, they went back, and then they were willing to talk. Something about being perhaps closer to death and realizing that they were running out of opportunities to tell their story, or feeling more peace with the fact that they had lived their lives according to whatever and were ready to speak. People change. So what you ask as a child or a young person may get a different response later. So that's one thing. Every family, except for my husband's family, they're so squeaky clean. I haven't found anything. They didn't even own slaves. They were like ministers and blah, blah, blah. There's no funny business. I haven't found anything anyway. But every other family, there's some outside child. There's some little secrets. My Grammy, she was the youngest of 10, all those Episcopalians, and they were so well behaved. She had a child that got put up for adoption that nobody knew about. There, especially in the Black community, enslavement had a whole host of trauma associated with it. There was scattering. There were many people who stayed right where they were. And they lived in an oppressive and horrible place where, for women, when it comes to the issues of bearing children and having autonomy over your body and having access to terminate the pregnancy if you really didn't think you wanted to keep a baby, or there were so many reasons why there was shame around people's thoughts of their history. That it is common that people would say, hey, especially around children, we don't want to talk about that. And the only thing that I can say now, because I have been the person making the phone call, hi, I'm calling because I'm trying to help somebody locate a family member that they don't have contact with. So like, the shame is not anyone's to truly carry. We're people. We come here by all different ways, and if you are willing to say, I know that sometimes some of this history is painful, and some of it we will never know, but I think it makes me so much healthier to know it and to understand. We don't know so much about DNA. The things we know are pretty remarkable. But trauma is carried in your DNA. So learning about the trauma history of your family so that you can heal those wounds and redirect and address the traumas that have been built up is really critical. And it's your turn when somebody tries to shut you down with secrets or just being uncomfortable, just to say, I love you, we're family, and I think it's important that we start healing. So, I'm not trying to broadcast our news, but we really need to understand.
I think once again, if we can thank Sasha for her time and insight. One thing again, as we leave here thinking about what things that we've talked about and heard, interesting things again from a historic point of view. First of all, again, for white women, enslavement was real. It was a lot of times part of their dowry. Again, you have to remember Martha Washington is the one that brought the enslaved people into the marriage with George Washington. They were her property. Also, freedom or your status as an enslaved person was determined by your mother's status. That's why Sally Hemings was always enslaved to Thomas Jefferson, and the children that they had were enslaved that he never freed. So you have to remember it was based on the mother's status. That's why also you had some enslaved people that owned slaves to try to keep their families intact. But there were times where the mother might have been free, so the children were free, but the father was still enslaved. And so those things that you also keep in mind as you read into those documents as you're looking, you have to keep in mind, okay, what is the status or why might somebody go away? Because also the thing is that in our community, you have family that supports one another. My mother's mother died when she was 9. She was raised by her aunt. Her father was still alive, but it wasn't seen at a time that it was good for a single man to raise his daughter. And so she was raised by her aunt, treated as a daughter. I say that because my aunt passed away and my parents raised my cousin, but I see her as my sister, so sometimes they have a conversation, oh, my sister Clotel, but if you look at it, that's my cousin Clotel. And so sometimes you might say, well, hey, this is my uncle, but it's really not your uncle, or it might be age differences that really your uncle is your brother or some cousin like this. And so you have to keep in mind as you look at these documents, okay, what I call this person might not be their same status, or what is the status of that family. And so you have to keep all those lines.
I just wanted to say my email address is sasha.mitchell@gmail.com. If you have any questions, you can email me. I don't always catch up right away, but I'm happy to help. S as in Sam, A, S as in Sam, H-A, and the little period, and then Mitchell, M-I-T-C-H-E-L-L, @gmail.com.
And so again, thank you all for making time and coming on in and listening and being a part of this Lunch and Learn. Hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow. But again, if someone wants to come on down, I'm going to move out the way so you don't have to worry, well, he's going to listen in. If you might have a question or ask for another point, feel free and enjoy it. We have some punch and lemonade, some sodas left, a couple lunches left. Please don't go away hungry, but thank you.